Saturday afternoon. Normally at this time, I'm at the Field of Dreams known as Dens Park Stadium. And obviously, you cultured people don't realise that that's the home of Dundee Football Club. But it is really, really good to be here and just to think a little bit about where we're at in terms of the culture and what's happening in the culture. And I know that sometimes there are Christians who are really into this, and they can be a wee bit geekish, and it can become quite dull, and others just say, no, I've had enough, leave that out. But I think it's important for us to understand where we're at. Now, I want to read a little bit from God's Word, from Acts chapter 17, and to read perhaps from verse 5. Acts 17 and verse 5. But other Jews were jealous, so they rounded up some bad characters from the marketplace, formed a mob, and started a riot in the city. They rushed to Jason's house in search of Paul and Silas in order to bring them out to the crowd. But when they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some other believers before the city officials, shouting, "These men who've caused trouble all over the world have now come here, and Jason has welcomed them into his house. They are all defying Caesar's decrees, saying there's another king, one called Jesus." When they heard this, the crowd and the city officials were thrown into turmoil. Then they put Jason and the others on bail and let them go. These men who have caused trouble all over the world have now come here also. Or, as it could be translated, these men is in the King James Version. These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also. It's a very interesting idea of the world being turned upside down. I will set a timer so that I don't keep you here all day. The world turned upside down. When were we ever accused of that? I think that there's something in our Christianity which has become quite comfortable. My experience is, personally, that when God begins to work, things become distinctly uncomfortable. I remember a guy coming to church, and he was an oil rig worker, and he hadn't been for a while, so I went to church up north in the Highlands. And he came out of church, first time he'd ever been, and he looked at me and he said, You just come to my house to get information about me, so you can say it from that thing up there. And I said to him, hey, listen, back off. I prepared my sermon long before you came. I had no idea you were coming. I said, maybe that's just God speaking to you. Well, I've never seen anything like it. He started running, literally running. He just ran. And I had this old elder with me who wouldn't say boo to a goose. And the old elder shouted, aye, you can run, but you can't hide. I just, there's something when God is at work, to be honest, it just doesn't feel very comfortable. We spend a lot of time in our churches trying to make people comfortable, unless you're kind of old style Free Presbyterian, at least in the Scottish sense, hard pews and, we'll keep you going for an hour and a half for one sermon. But usually we're saying, we want people to feel comfortable. And in a sense we do, nice comfortable seats and really good coffee and all that kind of stuff. But when God is at work, it can be distinctly uncomfortable. I want us to think about God being at work in our culture and what's happening. I do mention the magazine to you again, and there are some copies left for you. We want to make it, which everyone says this can't work, and they might be right, but we want to make it kind of minimal adverts, virtually no adverts, and so for that it has to be subscription. So have a look at it. If you like it, then please subscribe to it. The next edition is actually going to be on Islam in Europe. And also, I did mention the blog earlier. I know a few people here have a look at it, and if you want to have a look at some of the stuff we've been doing on education, you can look there. There is a Chinese curse that says, may you live in interesting times. I think we live in interesting times. I think, if you'll forgive the reference, this says a little bit about my age. Not quite. When I was 8 years old, I wasn't really that much into Bob Dylan, but the times, they are changing. And in the church, we'd better start understanding them, or we too will sink like a stone. Let's think about the world that was being turned upside down. In Acts 17, it was a multicultural world, although with a dominance of the Greco-Roman culture. There were wars and rumours of wars, there was pollution in the main cities, there was immigration problems, economic recession, sexual confusion, power politics, media suppression, religious radicalism, and a growing gap between rich and poor. It was in this confused, vibrant, stimulating, depressing, violent world that the good news of Jesus Christ came. The Romans thought it was one religion amongst many. They didn't care initially. And yet it was this religion that turned the Greco-Roman pagan world upside down. Now you can see the parallels with today. Again, I know it's a little bit different in Northern Ireland, but basically every politician in the UK wants to think of themselves as progressive. Because what's the opposite of progressive? Regressive. Well, are you progressive people or are you regressive people? I would argue that most of what people today call progressive is not actually human society progressing, but that it is regression. And what I mean by that is we are regressing to a Greco-Roman pagan view of the world. Now, in lots of ways. For example, the fad for gyms. You know, how many of you go to gyms? How many members of gyms? How many of you pump iron? Well, not many of you by the looks of you, but some of you. Sorry. Some of you clearly do. Well, you know, that was a big thing in Roman times. The whole sexual thing was a big thing in Roman times. Now, the Christian church came into that and turned that world upside down. A Jewish teacher like Paul, a doctor like Luke, fishermen like Peter and John, they turned that upside down. The early church fathers, Justin Martyr, Augustine, turned the Roman Empire upside down. The Celtic monks, early reformers like the Czech Jan Hus, the Englishman William Tyndale and John Wycliffe, they turned early modern Europe upside down. The Reformation turned society upside down. I think the proclamation and living out of the gospel turned the church, the economy, and the whole of society upside down. Sometimes it went wrong, because we are sinful human beings. You know the saying, if you find the perfect church, don't join it because you'll just spoil it. Well, all of us are in a mess. Remember a guy coming one time to us from a situation where there's a lot of damaged Christians, by the way. There's a lot of abuse at one level, spiritual abuse, I think. And I remember this guy come in and he says, look, Dave, we haven't been in church for a year or so. We really want to come, but we're not sure. We are believers. We do believe in Jesus, but tell me about your church. And I said, what, you want it in a one-liner? He said, yeah. I said, okay. I'm sorry. I said, we're a bunch of screwed up people in a screwed up world with a great Saviour. And he said, I'm in. Because if you belong to the church that's like the Christian version of Little House on the Prairie, you know the perfect family with the kind of Russian doll kids who are all immaculately dressed, and they come in, they behave perfectly in church, you know that family is so messed up. And the same with the church, the perfect church where everyone loves one another and everything's great, and nothing ever bad ever really happens, except it does, just behind closed doors or behind closed curtains. Well, in the real world, the real church is a mess, but the real church does turn it upside down. Oops, I will go back. Let me just go back one. The kind of world that Britain is today. Let's just think a little bit about that. I think it's phenomenally changing. My denomination, very traditional denomination in some ways, and I remember one elder in the denomination when I became a minister was a friend of mine actually, but he hated what I was trying to do, and there was a little bit of a rift there. And just last year, in his 80s now, an intelligent man, a teacher actually. The two don't necessarily go together. He sent a message through his daughter, and he said, "Tell David I appreciate what he's doing now, but," he said, "I don't understand this world in which we live anymore. It's just changed so much." And even the change is just going on all the time. We do a podcast called Quantum of Solace. And a year and a half ago, we did one which caused a bit of bother because I said that I thought the issue for 2015 was going to be the issue of transgender. And that the whole idea of gender was just going to be completely destroyed. And people thought that was a bit of an exaggeration. Well, it turned out to be correct. I think the last time I looked on Facebook, you can choose between 56 different genders. Using even basic language is quite extraordinary. And I suspect there are many of you within schools, those of you who are teachers, I would be really surprised if you do not have to face up to this issue. Because once you start telling 8, 9, 10-year-olds that they can be whatever gender they want to be, you're going to end up really, really messed up. And that is what is happening. I think one of the things that's happening in our culture. Now, as I indicated this morning, I think there's no point in us trying to retain a Christendom that's gone, but there's no point in us despairing either. Because as we regress to a Greco-Roman pagan culture, remember, it's within that culture that the Christian gospel first flourished. There is a tendency amongst many missiologists to say, well, Europe was the first continent Christianized, and now it's the turn of the Chinese or the Africans or the South Americans, and Europe's just too hard. And I want to ask, why can't we be the first continent, if you like, that's re-Christianized? I had about 15 years ago in our international cafe, vast majority of students, Chinese, African, Asian. About 5 years ago, for the first time ever, we had more Germans than Chinese. Why? What's going on? What? France, for example, isn't France supposed to be spiritually dead? Yet there have been hundreds of churches planted in France in the past decade. And a lot of those are to do with immigration, but not all of them are. And that is, for me, something that is very interesting. But we live, I think, in a secular society in which at best Christianity is barely tolerated and at worst is pushed to the margins, where religious freedom of expression and action is threatened. And by the way, listening to the panel for me was really, really interesting. Because I do think complacency is your worst enemy, and your second worst enemy is fear or cynicism. But, the complacency, well, we're fine. In our school, in our area, we cannot imagine it being any other way. Well, that's the same for all of us. We couldn't imagine it being any other way. But it changes very, very quickly. I will make a prediction for you that you will have individual atheists and so on who will start taking you to court for various things that happen in terms of schools. They will object, and as the quote from A.A. Hodge is really important, because he's saying you're always going to go to the lowest common denominator. People getting offended all the time. I had a kid yell at me the other week saying, "You have no right to come in here and tell us about God. That offends me." And I looked at him and said, "Son, if I was going to get rid of stuff that offended me, you'd be long gone out of this class." Maybe that wasn't the subtle approach. I said, we just have to put up with what offends us. "Well, you can't say that to me." Well, I just did. I said, now you need to start thinking, because you've got to be able to take on board views which you don't agree with, and not be offended by everything you disagree with. Or we're going to end up with this just horrendous society. You know, of course, about the trend amongst students. I'm not sure that this is the case in Belfast, in Queens or anything. But, all these poor wee, pathetic wee students, or the wee souls, they need safe spaces so that they can be protected. Nice comfy rooms with a couch and a teddy bear. And so that because they're distraught that someone has come on their university and said something with which they don't agree. And that's the insane world which we are creating, or it is being created. So I want to look at some of the trends in the culture that are in Britain today, and I believe in Northern Ireland as much as anywhere else. Number one is what I would call secular utopianism. There are those of our fellow citizens who believe we're on the verge of entering a liberal progressive utopia. As I say, last time I was here, I debated in the Stormont Hotel with a significant number of people who believed that you are holding Northern Ireland back. That it would just be such a progressive society. I mean, look at Southern Ireland, how it's changed from being a regressive, repressive, Catholic-dominated culture to suddenly being one leap and the tiger is free and so on. But they really do believe that. It's a form of secularism, largely atheistic, based upon the incredible faith that human beings are essentially good and are progressing towards a better world. Why is that dangerous? I'll tell you why it's dangerous. Let me give you an example. If you say human beings are essentially good and you should treat all human beings as being essentially good, it is one of the most foolish beliefs that you can ever have, and one of the most dangerous. Here's why. Imagine a man comes up to my daughter in the park, and when she's, let's say, 12 years old, she comes back, she says, "Dad, I met this really nice guy in the park, and he was great. He's invited me back to his flat to watch some videos, and he gave me some sweets. Isn't that wonderful? And I go, "Yes, sweetheart, it is. The world's a great place and full of really kind people. You just go back to that man's flat and watch the videos with him." You see how daft that is? Now, there's a balance. You don't tell your child everyone who speaks to you is a potential pervert. And you've got to stay away. Don't speak to anyone. You don't go that way either, but people need a healthy understanding of what human nature is like. The atheist philosopher John Gray, in a fascinating book called Black Mass, points out that secular utopianism based upon Enlightenment principles has not led to a brave new world, but instead has been largely responsible for some of the great humanitarian disasters of the modern era. No one believed in the inevitability of human progress more than the Nazis and the communists. Louis Nainier says this: Hitler and the Third Reich were the gruesome and incongruous consummation of an age which is none other believed in progress and felt it was being achieved. We're progressing. We're progressing. We're a progressive nation. I'm in Scotland, obviously, and we have our own government, and we're very, very close actually. We came within a whisker of leaving the United Kingdom, and one of the things I've noticed is just the sheer optimism that many people have. If only we got this, if only we did this, then we'd be a progressive nation. And everyone knows who the progressive nations are. The Swedes and the Finns and so on. And I've just finished reading a book about the almost perfect people, the nearly perfect people. It's just fascinating reading about these different countries and different cultures. When you believe that you're progressive and then things don't work out, what happens is you get very angry. And you get angry at the ones you think are being regressive, holding things back. And that's why there's such anger against the church as well. Our modern liberal progressives, secular progressives, are offended at any comparison with the extreme ideologies of Stalinism, North Korea, Maoism, Nazism, and so on. And they end up saying, well, if they were atheists, they didn't do bad things because of their atheism. Which is always a strange way of putting it, because apparently if you're Christian and you do a bad thing, it is because of your Christianity. Now, it's wrong for us to immediately equate secular utopianism with necessarily the extremes of that. But we will find that secular utopianism, when it doesn't work out, looks for someone to blame, and religion is a good candidate. We are, after all, the regressive, repressive, and ridiculous. That's why, don't do this unless you want to. If you go to a secularist website, you will find that there is, or you get involved in a debate. Sometimes the anger just completely astounds me, being compelled sometimes to withdraw from these things. I did a survey once of the Scottish Secular Society's Facebook page, and although they keep saying we're not anti-religious, 96% of their posts were anti-religious. You see how it works. Sorry, I'm just going to get some water. I see this working in a practical way or a non-practical way. I remember we had a girl come from a student from a city, Aberdeen, and after she'd been for a few weeks, her parents came down. And I'm standing at the door and I shook their hands. Are you visitors? They said, yes, we are. And then they said, I said, what are you here for? And they said, well, our daughter is over there. That's her over there. So I said, that's very interesting. Nice to meet you. Why are you here? Because it's unusual for parents to come within the first 3 weeks or so. Is there a problem? And they said, oh yes, there's a problem. And I said, okay. Is there a problem I can help you with? Oh no, you're the problem. So I thought, what have I done? Have I said something inadvertently? Have I made a flippant remark? Has it been taken in a wrong way? And I said, well, I'm sorry, you're going to have to tell me. And they said, well, look, we brought up our daughter to be normal, not to go to church. You know, we thought she'd come to university, maybe get a boyfriend, party, freshers week, all the rest of it. As long as she did her work, we didn't care. And then we started getting letters home. Mom, Dad, Dundee's great, loving university, found this fantastic church. I said, so you came to check us out? They said, yes, we came to check you out. I said, okay. How did you find us? This was at the end of the service. And they said, you were surprisingly normal. And I said, okay. And that would have been fine if I'd just shut up. But I couldn't resist it, and I shouldn't have said it, but I did. I said, well, you caught us on a good day. It's next week we do the child sacrifice. And he looked at me as though I was, for a nanosecond, I said, come on guys, seriously? But really, there are people who believe that religious people fly planes into buildings. Not all religious people, though. When was the last Presbyterian suicide bomber? Well, maybe I shouldn't ask. In Northern Ireland, perhaps. But, you know, I said, look, even my charismatic friends don't even think like that. What are you talking about? But people have this impression it's religious terrorists, it's a religion that causes all this trouble. And you are religious people. You know, if you're Scripture Union, Scripture, that's religious. And so what you find is that this supposedly progressive liberal society is only progressive and tolerant and liberal to those who agree with its views, and it becomes increasingly intolerant to those who disagree. And that, by the way, is where the Asher's Bakery case came from. It's not out of tolerance, inequality, and diversity. It's an attempt to mold the whole of society into thinking in one particular way. And if that continues, we will find ourselves more and more being accused of these are the people who cause trouble all over the world. Now, we shouldn't want to cause trouble, but that is what we will be accused of. So, there is this kind of utopian secularism. And you'll get that in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has had lots of religious troubles. What we need is a completely secular society where everything is neutral and everyone is neutral and everything is fair and everything comes under the law. Yes, but who makes the law? And what are the laws to be? Those are big, big questions. So, religious fundamentalism. Religion is not the whole or even the main problem, but neither is it the solution. The truth is that the great religions can do a great deal of harm. Just because something is religious doesn't mean to say that we have to respect it or give it special status. The trouble is, again, in our secular society, secularism has decided that all religions are the same. Now, what are our government in the United Kingdom concerned about? They're concerned about extremist schools, Islamic schools, the madrasas in Birmingham, the Trojan horse thing, and so on. But because they've been taught that all religions are the same, and because they don't want to upset people, they've decided when they're going to inspect schools and inspect religious organizations that do teaching, that we're going to have government inspections of Sunday schools and stuff. Now, I'm sorry about, or women's groups and things like that, but yeah, there's been some rather weird connections between Christianity and politics. But seriously? Why? Well, it's equality. You've got to treat them all the same. Really? I'll tell you how that works out. It works out me getting on a train at Dundee Station and the transport police coming up and saying, "Excuse me, sir, are you in a hurry?" "No, not particularly. How can I help you?" "Well, we're the transport police, and would you mind if we searched you?" I said, "What for? Bombs and stuff?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "Well, and if I was in a hurry and had a bomb, would that be okay?" And they said, "Well, yes. Can you come and would you mind filling out the form?" So I filled out the form. And they said, "You don't have to, but would you mind filling in the bit about your religion and ethnicity?" And I said, "You're quota gathering, aren't you?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "You're just wasting your time, aren't you?" And they said, "Yes." They said, we do not expect people like you to be taking bombs onto trains. But he says, it's got to appear. And there's the word, it's got to appear to be fair. Well, I think that is happening in terms of how we treat religion, and it's why secular politicians cannot deal with Islam. Now, please be very careful here. I have Muslim neighbours, and it's entirely wrong to put all Muslims in the same category. But as long as our secular politicians want to treat Islam as a variant of Anglicanism, then we're going to be in trouble. It's likely that Britain will become the country with the third largest Islamic population in Europe, overtaking both France and Germany within the next 20 or 30 years, with 12% of the population being Muslim. Well, what's the problem with that? 12%. What I would suggest is that you will find that 10% is most likely the tipping point. And here's why. To understand Islam, you have to realize that Islam is not just a religion. And it's not as how our secularists would see religion as being a private thing. All the Muslims I know believe that Islam is political as well. And if you've got 10% of I was at a mosque in Dundee doing a debate and a discussion, which was really interesting actually, because the Baha'is were there and the pagans were there as well, and the Muslim guys loved me for slaughtering the pagans. Not literally, by the way, just in case you're wondering. And but we had a long chat afterwards, and they said, "Dave, you're almost a Muslim, if it wasn't for Jesus." And I said, "Yeah, that's the point." But the interesting thing was, it was a Monday night, not a Friday night, and it wasn't even the biggest mosque. And there were 300 young men there for a prayer meeting. I don't know a single church in my city that would get anywhere near that on any night of the week. Islam is a political, social organisation, and there's enormous power and strength. And, I'm not unsympathetic towards that in that way. But Islamophobia and all the things that are going on, I don't think we need to care that. Well, we shouldn't absolutely go that route. We need to be really careful, though, that we need to realise what's happening. G.K. Chesterton once said that when people cease to believe in God, it's not that they believe in nothing, it's that they believe in anything. And there's all different kinds of things going on. There is religious fundamentalism, there's state fascism. Now, that's a strong word. Fascism in both its Italian and German forms was about the power of the corporate state. State controls everything. We've been brought up in a society with liberal democratic values of freedom of expression, diversity and equality, and the belief that we are the good guys. We in general have been a secular society, separation of church and state, with, how will I put it, this kind of separation of the powers, but we're founded upon Christian principles. Now the trouble is, as Christianity is removed, what replaces it? I don't really think it's going to be Islam just now, but what will replace it are politicians and governments and city councils who believe that they are the ones who determine everything. Samuel Rutherford, Scottish minister, wrote a very influential book in the 17th century called Lex Rex. The law is king. And he was talking about how the importance of the law of God supersedes the law of the king. The king at the time saw that as seditious, because he believed Rex Lex, The king is the law. We are moving into a situation where the state is going to become God in all aspects, telling us what to think, what to believe, what to do, and not really allowing any dissidence. In an absolutist state, there's plenty of work for lawyers, bureaucrats, and bankers. We've moved from 10 commandments to 10,000 regulations per year, and the regulators that are there to enforce them. Whilst obviously any state needs laws, the danger is that an increasingly powerful state will result in more abuse and corruption without the checks and balances coming from out with the state and from within the heart. If you remove God, you will inevitably end up with an authoritarian state. Ironically, the very thing that protects freedom and diversity and equality is the notion that there is a God to whom we have to answer, and not just an electorate, and not just other powerful beings. And then, consumerist dumbed-down materialism. Totalitarian states can only survive if the control mechanisms are strong and the populace satisfied. Now, many of your teachers, hopefully all of you are educated. Educated people, there are certain books I would argue that educated people in the UK should read. And one is George Orwell's 1984, which envisaged a kind of Stalinist totalitarian state. And the other is Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which foresaw a population divided and controlled by predetermined social status, social education, and drugs. I think Huxley was the better prophet. People in Britain today are told you can be whatever you want to be. But for many, that's just Disney-esque waffle. You know it. Come on, have you seen it 1,000 times? You know, you can be, you know, it's, you know the motto. I believe I can fly, I believe I can touch the sky. No, you can't. Jump off a building and see what happens. Now, I'm sorry, I belong to a school of philosophy called Scottish Common Sense Philosophy. And that's common sense. You can't be telling people that. Be whatever you want to be. Have you seen Britain's Got Talent? What's the other one? The X Factor. And, you know, whatever you think of Simon Cowell, he certainly knows how to make money. You know, the favourite one is where they have where the guy comes on and he sings and he's rubbish. And the other panelists are like that, you know, they just, oh my goodness. And Simon gets to speak and Simon says, keep your day job. You can't sing, you're rubbish. And the guy comes off and tears are pouring down his face. And he goes to camera. Simon doesn't believe I can sing. Simon doesn't believe in me, but I believe in me. I'm going to be number one. And everyone's looking, you idiot. Well, actually, you probably would be number one. You can't sing. But, you know, you're thinking, come on, you can't sing. Why do you? Because all you've got to do is believe. Just believe you can be what you want to be. It's a dumbed-down society. Drugs, 15 minutes of fame on reality TV, sex, smartphones, widescreen TVs. That's what offers to people. Our elites don't tell us to eat cake. They don't offer us bread and circuses. But they do presume that we'll be happy living dumbed-down, mediocre lives with the cultural crumbs from their table. Education has become much more about social engineering and training people for jobs than it is about educating people, and I mentioned that this morning. That, the consumerism, and you know, I find it interesting as well that sometimes, I remember going into a Christian home one time and the woman was really upsetting me for having said in a sermon that I'd been to the cinema. Now, I'd actually been to watch Chariots of Fire, so that should have been okay. But no, this was worldly, going to the cinema. Yeah, right, worldly. As I saw the luxury carpet, the jag outside the door, and the big screen TV. Sometimes we strain at gnats and we swallow camels. And we need to be really, really careful. One of the things I've noticed in Northern Ireland, there was a Baptist minister who told me, how's your church getting on? I said, he said, one level, great. Morning service, we've had to move to 2 morning services. Just lots of young families coming in. People have moved out of Belfast and they're coming here and it's just fantastic. I said, yeah, but there's a but there, obviously. I'm sensing a certain cynicism. He said, yes, our evening service is way down and our prayer meeting is way down. And I said, what do you think is happening? He said, oh, that's easy. Money. people are much better off. They don't have time. They're all busy making money. They've got second homes. They've got holiday homes. They've got so much. And they still want to go to church. But they've backed off from a lot of things. That materialism comes in. New Age paganism as well. There are many people who don't accept the certainties of scientific materialism, the control of the state. They reject totalitarian religion, but they want spirituality. Go into most bookstores, and again, I'm not thinking here of the evangelical bookshop or something like that, but go to Waterstones and look at the religion section. And again, I've noticed here it's a little bit different from elsewhere in the UK, but even so, still a majority of stuff that's kind of New Age things. And I can't believe that I've grown up to live in a Britain where there are people who seriously are concerned about where their toilet is placed in their house because of the feng shui of house and the aroma and what's going to happen. And I'm going, are we going completely mad? I've met many people who've argued that paganism should be accorded equal status to Christianity in schools, including even Satanism. And then this is, for me, the huge one just now, sexual confusion and dysfunctional families. And again, I don't have time to go into all of this, but the sexual liberation of the 1960s has turned out to be anything but liberating for the vast majority of people. I've lived to see a Conservative Prime Minister say that the redefinition of marriage was his proudest achievement. It's hard to think of anything more opposite of somebody saying, glorying in their shame. I suggested when the same-sex marriage debate was going on that on the logic of that debate there was no reason why we shouldn't have polygamy or incestuous marriages. Already polygamy is being advocated by some people. The incestuous marriage thing, people say no, no, no. But again, I've come across 3 articles in major British newspapers saying, why not? And there will continue to be a drip, drip, drip effect. Now, again, I can't go into all the details, but there's something called queer theory, which you should know about. And that's not a derogatory term, that's what it termed itself. Queer theory came from the 1970s, late 1960s, early 1970s. And it was an attempt to re-engineer humanity so there was no specific sexuality or gender. We are going to move very quickly from the position where our gender and sexuality are perceived as fixed. So, for example, homosexuality, what was the biggest argument? That's the way God made me. It's fixed. But we're going to move towards it being much more a fluid thing. So you're going to get gender fluidity is the buzz phrase right now. Sexual fluidity. We moved instantly. We moved within months from being born that way, Lady Gaga, to you choose what you want to be. Peter Tatchell, I did a debate with him, and I'm giving you this quote. It's a long quote, but just it'll help you understand. Overcoming homophobia will result in more people having gay sex, but fewer people claiming gay identity. The medieval Catholic Church, despite all its obscurantism and intolerance, got one thing right. Homosexuality, it is not, it suggested, that special sin of a unique class of people, but a temptation to which any mortal might succumb. It now seems fairly certain, in the light of modern research, that most people are born with a sexual desire that is to varying degrees capable of both heterosexual and homosexual attraction. Daily Telegraph ran an article 6 months ago that said there are no straight women. Sorry ladies, but that's what it said. Now, ironically, you'll see us going, once homophobia declines, we're bound to witness the emergence of a homosexuality that is quite different from the homosexuality we know today. With the strictures on queerness removed and same-sex relationships normalised and accepted, more people will have gay sex, but paradoxically, less of them will identify as gay. Most of our kids are perceiving themselves as being bisexual. And I was recently accused of being biphobic. which, I mean, phobias are everywhere. I think I'm every kind of phobic. But it's just spectacular how that occurs. I remember my oldest daughter's class. It was the in thing for people to say they were bisexual. They hadn't a clue, I don't think, what it meant. Anyway, let me go on. Gay identity is the product of anti-gay repression. When homosexuality is disparaged and victimized, gay people understandably feel they have to affirm their desires and lifestyle. However, if prejudice is vanquished, and if one sexuality is not privileged over another, defining oneself as gay or straight will cease to be necessary and have no social significance. The need to maintain sexual differences and boundaries disappear with the demise of straight supremacism. Homosexuality as a separate, exclusive, clearly demarcated orientation and identity will then begin to fade, as will its mirror opposite, heterosexuality. Instead, the vast majority of people will be open to the possibility of both opposite sex and same-sex attractions, same-sex relations. They won't feel the need to label themselves or others as gay or straight, because in a non-homophobic culture, no one will give a damn about who loves and lusts after who. Now, I debated with Tatchell, and it was a very, very, very good debate. And I said to him at the end, privately, Peter, you can get whatever you want, because the government, you're a superhero, and he is a consistent guy, and in some ways he's a guy to be admired. By the way, I know some of you probably have heard, he changed his mind on the Asher's Bakery case. He's now supporting them, which is really bad. He is a really interesting guy, and a really honest guy. But I said to him, Peter, you have not changed your mind. You were always opposed to same-sex marriage, because you're opposed to marriage. All that's happened is, you're now supporting same-sex marriage because you see it as a way to destroy marriage. And he didn't disagree. And I said, you will get what you want except this. You won't get love and equality and diversity and so on. Because that's not how it comes, because you're rejecting what God has given. And by the way, his mother is an evangelical Christian whom he greatly respects. I don't think our politicians, and forgive the Scots phrase, have a Scooby about what they've just done. They think they're being liberal and tolerant. But I haven't met a single politician yet, and debated a lot of senior ones, who can even tell me what marriage is, never mind redefine it. We're living in this just mad world where people don't grasp things. And I do want to, by the way, I want to just say something here as well. Avoid passionately the homophobic yuck factor. You know, don't tolerate in your church's heterosexual sin, sexual sin, and then, you know, be repulsed by homosexuality. I want homosexuals to be welcome in my church, but I'm going to teach them the same sexual ethic as I do to heterosexuals. And that is that sex is between a man and a woman in the context of marriage. Well, it's a mess that we're living in, because the sexual fluidity has now become gender fluidity. And the havoc that is reaping with young people is already beginning. Our government, the British government, are putting forward a proposal that you can walk into a post office and sign a form that says you change your sex. By the way, that's women's sport finished. Completely. People joked, laughed when I said that before, but I discovered a photo last week. The Iranian women's football team has 8 men in it, who are quote-unquote awaiting gender reassignment. I mean, sorry, if I'm Andy Murray and I think I'm not going to win Wimbledon because Djokovic is too great, you know this, I'm just going to call myself Andrina, and that's me. I'll get the same prize money. You can't stop me, because that's what I feel I am. That's what I feel I want to be. And, you know, I'm in a class a while ago, and there's a girl there who's decided that she's a boy. I mean, it's crazy. There's a firm in the United States that's just been fined $120,000 for not allowing people to go to, men to go to the women's toilets. That's the world in which we're at. Inequality as well. There's so much inequality, and in all different kinds of ways, and we as Christians should be concerned about that. I'm not going to go into it anymore to say, how do we live in a world where 62 people own half the world's wealth? It just doesn't, it's just wrong, you know, and there's so many things going on there. So, how, in terms of working within that world, working within that culture, and there are other things that you may wish to identify, wish to pick up on. Let me just say something about the church. Now, the church, we need to be aware of the world that we live in, but you would not get the New Testament church with, banners marching down the street going, the Apostle Paul, down with that sort of thing, or anything like that. They just lived in that world. They expected unbelievers to behave like unbelievers, but they expected believers to behave like believers. And the contrast between the two was so massive. Absolutely massive. And that's what should be happening. People should be coming into your church going, wow, I didn't know these kind of people existed. If you've got a church where it's kind of ranting and, people have asked, you're really homophobic. I mean, people, when I go on the BBC, people phone in immediately and say, ban him, he's homophobic. It's insane. But I think in 30 years ministry, I've preached 4 times on homosexuality because I preach through the Bible, and that's about how often it's come up. But I'm aware of what's going on. I'm aware that pornography is a bigger problem for most people in my congregation, to be honest. But I am aware there are people who struggle with same-sex attraction. There are lots of other issues that are tied in that as well. But people need to be able to see that the church is different. I'm not so much concerned with numerical decline in the church. I'm concerned about the spiritual decline, about the world, the church playing catch up with the world, rather than the church turning the world upside down. Rather than being prophetic, we've become pathetic. Compromise, infighting, lovelessness, complacency, despair, adapting Christ to suit the culture, rather than proclaiming Christ to challenge the culture, are hallmarks of a decaying and dying church. I had a minister once say to me, a friend of mine, David, I have seen people weep over the moving of a communion table who've never wept over a lost soul. What causes troubles in church? Personality clashes, worship style. How many people choose their church? I like that song. I don't like that song. I like that singer. I don't like that singer. What? I like that preacher. I don't like that preacher. Well, fair enough, depending on what they're preaching. But because of the suit they're wearing or the non-suit they're wearing? But that's how shallow and trivial we have become in the church. And yet in the New Testament what we find is that people would come in and say, truly God is amongst you. Is that what people would find when they came into your church? You do all this work in schools and a kid decides, I want to go to church. And then they go to church and what happens? Virtually nothing. I think we reach out. I think we've got to do that. I'll give you that final quote in a minute, but just one thing to kind of help you in this and just indicate where I think the passion for all of this, for me, comes from. I want to understand the culture in which I'm living because I want to reach out to people. I don't want to despair. The more I see, the more I'm inclined to despair. To be honest, sometimes the more I see in the church, the more I'm inclined to despair. Because sometimes there's a hardness and a cruelty. And sometimes amongst church leadership there's infighting and squabbling and power politics. And I'm looking and I'm saying, how's this different from a political party? And it really hurts, to be honest. And my son's just going in for the ministry and sometimes I want to say to him, don't do it. It's just not worth it. Go be a teacher or do something useful with your life. Not because being in the ministry is not useful. It's very, very useful. But it's incredibly painful because people are so reluctant to face up to reality. It's as though Christians are kind of saying, look, we've got to face enough reality in the world. Please in the church can we have a little bit of unreality, where the church should be the most real place, where God opens up your hurts and your sores and your scabs, emotionally speaking, if you like, spiritually speaking, so that He can heal, so He wounds in order to heal. That should be what's going on. But sometimes for me there's just so much unreality. And yet I have seen how someone comes in, you go and do an outreach event in a cafe, and you tell them, listen, you've become interested because of this. See that person there, see that person there, see that person. Go to their church on Sunday and you'll meet Jesus. Is that true of my church? Is that true of your church? There was one of these dreadful reality TV shows. It was some kind of parent swap thing. No. There was a kid from Derby, and there was another kid as well. I don't remember. I remember the boy. I don't remember the girl. And I was watching it. You know, you shouldn't watch it. It's like one of these train wreck programs. You know, I shouldn't be watching this. It's like Neighbours or something like that. You know, I really shouldn't be watching this, but who cares? It's wallpaper trash, and you know, it helps me switch my brain off for a while, like most television. But this wasn't. This was quite fascinating. It was like watching a train crash. So this kid from Derby, 17 years old, gay, takes drugs, drinks a lot, smokes like a chimney, swears like a trooper, gets sent to Atlanta to be partially adopted by an African-American Baptist couple who are like mega strict. And you just watch the whole program thinking, oh my goodness. And I actually really, really liked the kid. And the African-American couple, I got to really like them. Initially they were so far out strict, I thought, you know, that's wrong, that's a bad impression of Christianity, but actually they were lovely, lovely people. And they really loved that kid. And I was so impressed with them, actually. Anyway, what struck me about the program, the whole program ended up being very, very moving. As he's going back to England, and he's in the taxi to Atlanta Airport, and the BBC are filming him, and the voice from behind the camera says, have you enjoyed being here? Yeah. What have you enjoyed? Oh, the people. They're just great. These people were just great. They're really into this guy Jesus, aren't they? And I found this really emotional. He said, see, when I go back to England, where will I find Jesus? Is he in the yellow pages? And I edited a magazine at that time, not the Solace magazine, the Free Church magazine, and I was so moved by it. I picked up the phone and I said to my designer, my next edition, I'm going to have this article, where will I find Jesus? Design it like the yellow pages. And I wrote something about, if that kid walked into our church, would he find Jesus? But here's the key thing. Biblically speaking, it's not where will he find Jesus. It's where will Jesus find him? And how will Jesus find him? And you've got to think about it in that way. I was asked a question, it was a great question, from our maths teacher, praise leader, extraordinarily gifted, multi-talented, one of these disgusting people. Probably plays professional football in his spare time. You know, but looks like Brad Pitt. So you know who I'm talking about. You know, it was a great question about teaching in school and how you do things and so on. Well, do you know, everywhere, if you're a Christian, everywhere you're going, that's Jesus finding people. All the time. That quote we had about, at the end of the last session, about Jesus caring for children, it's not a cute quote that you put on a Hallmark card. Because the question about the angels and the value, Christ so cares for these children that anyone who mistreats them deserves to have a millstone tied around them and thrown into the pit of hell. We have to care for them. This is my final. The man brought me to the gate facing east, and I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east. His voice was like the roar of rushing waters, and the land was radiant with his glory. The vision I saw was like the vision I'd seen when he came to destroy the city, and like the visions I'd seen by the Kibar River, and I fell face down. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. Then the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. I come from East Scotland. Maybe you come from East Belfast, a man from the East. Biblically, it just meant the Messiah. The Messiah was coming. And the passion that we feel must be a passion for Jesus Christ. And his glory filled the temple. Now I am fed up of preachers going, you know, the televangelist type, the glory, 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 and the glory came down. And I'm going, I really wish it would, because you'd be dead. You know, it's just a pathetic, blasphemous way that expressions from the Bible are taken and used and misused to manipulate people. But the truth of it is, as we communicate who Jesus is, you will find that sometimes, maybe very rarely, but sometimes in your life, sometimes when you're leading worship, sometimes when you're in church, sometimes when you're in school, sometimes when you're in your home, sometimes you will be so conscious of the presence of the glory of God that you know that no one in that room could walk out without knowing. That's what real revival is. That's what real renewal is. And that's what turns the world upside down. I have a man who kind of walked into our church, connected through another drug addict whose parents came to the church. And I visited him in prison. He read the Bible, he was converted. They called him the £2 million man because it's cost the state so far over £2 million to jail him, pay for his car thefts, his drug addictions, everything else. You can put him on as many rehab programs as you want. See, when he became a Christian, not everything became perfect. A lot of issues still to work through. But he stopped being the person who was taking, and started becoming someone who could give. That's what we need in our housing schemes. That's what we need in our schools. We need people who are given new hearts and new minds, who are born again, who have that radical change. And that only comes from the Holy Spirit. But the Holy Spirit uses means. He uses you, and He uses you. And that's what today has been about. Let's pray.